So let's talk about one of the more primitive ego games. It's the survival game. And the reason it's important to talk about this is that, first of all, it is something that's fairly easy to see. And it's also something that most spiritual people have already overcome, often in past lifetimes. So by seeing that you have overcome this, it becomes easier to realize you can also overcome other ego games. So to illustrate the survival game, let's take this story about Frankenstein. You have probably seen the movie. I remember seeing it when I was a child, and it literally scared me it took me a week to get over it before I could sleep normally again. But the idea is that there's this doctor who has this dream about creating a living creature. So he goes to graveyards, digs up corpses, and stitches these body parts, dead parts, together. And he creates this machine that can take lightning and imbue this creature with life. But of course, what happens is that the creature has a survival instinct, and it actually ends up killing the doctor and killing itself in the process. And in a sense, that's an illustration of the ego, because we take dead ideas, and they're dead because they are based on the illusion of separation and the consciousness of duality. As where I've explained in many of my videos, they're always the two opposite polarities. And so you take these dead ideas, put them together, and that's what creates the ego, or rather it creates all of these subconscious selves that make up the ego. But the ego, once it has been created, it has been endowed by us with consciousness, because everything we do as conscious beings, and therefore we are endowing it with consciousness. And that means the ego developed this survival instinct. And so the question is, how far is the ego willing to go to ensure its own survival? And that's where you have to realize the basic dynamic that we face as human beings. Because the ego has no limits. It cannot stop itself. The ego absolutely is like a computer that any threat that it sees, it will seek to eliminate so it can survive. And that means, in the extreme sense, it's willing to kill other people in order for you to survive physically. But it's also willing to kill you in order to survive physically. Of course, this is the irony, and this is why it's important to realize that the ego cannot see that the ego was created by you. So if it kills you, it can't survive. But nevertheless, the ego is so programmed, is so unable to think, it's not self-aware, that it can't realize that if it kills you, it's not going to survive by itself. Of course, the ego can kill you because, as I've explained, the essence of your being is the conscious you, which is an extension of your higher self. And it can't be killed by anything in the physical world, not even the ego. But the ego can go so far that it's willing to basically kill your creativity, kill your sense of well-being, kill your peace of mind. It's willing to do all kinds of things to engage you in these ego games that give energy to the ego so the ego can continue to survive. So that's what we'll talk about here. So let's look at this physical aspect of the survival game, because there are other aspects. But the physical aspect, if you look at many people on Earth, you can ask them, who are you? What kind of a being are you? And they'll be very identified with their physical bodies. And what happens is that for people at that level of consciousness, the ego has sort of merged with the body computer. We know from science that the physical body, and especially the physical brain, is extremely complex. And when the ego merges with this complex apparatus that's meant to secure the function of the body and the survival of the body, these people become totally identified with their physical bodies. And therefore they think that if their body dies, they die. And therefore it's justified to kill other people in order to secure the survival of their bodies. And this becomes an ego game that can trap people for a very, very long time, many, many embodiments. And the thing is, what I have said in several videos is that your universe works like a mirror or as a reality simulator. The mirror can only reflect back to you what you're projecting into the mirror. If you're sitting in front of a mirror, you can't expect the mirror image to smile at you unless you're smiling at the mirror. Right? That's just basic fact of life, right? So it's the same thing with the universe. So what happens is that when people go into this level where they're so identified with the physical body that they're willing to kill other bodies to secure the survival of their body, what are they projecting into the cosmic mirror? They're actually projecting that they want to live in a world where other people are seeking to kill them. And the reason for this is, of course, people are not consciously aware of this. But the reason for this is actually that the ego has managed to trap these people in this game, this survival game, where the ego sees other people as a threat to your physical body. So you are thinking, I have to focus all of my attention, all of my energy on surviving, on avoiding these threats, of killing these people who might threaten me. And this means you never have time to look for the ego, to look at yourself, to look at the beam in your own eye. You never have time for this because you're always projecting out the threats out there. In an extreme example, you take a soldier who is at war, and the enemy could be anywhere and they could start shooting at him at any moment. If you go up to a person like that and say, you know, I think you should work on your psychology, I see this problem you're having. Is he likely to say, yeah, let's sit down and talk about my psychology? No, he's going to say, get lost. They could shoot at me at any moment. So you see how the physical survival game becomes a way for the ego to draw people's attention away from the ego, from looking at themselves and their psychology. And it also, because of the universe being a mirror, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you're projecting into the mirror that you want to live in a world where other people are a threat to you, then other people who are having the same projection, they see you as a threat, you see them as a threat, you are fulfilling each other's prophecy. You are both are projecting out that they want an enemy. And so you have people, and you can see this, you can see it in the Middle East, for example, who for thousands of years, they have been trapped in this very primitive physical survival game, always feeling that there's the threat. And this can lead to this extreme paranoia where you think somebody's out to kill you and you need to anticipate this and you need to kill anybody that you think is a threat. This is what you see in dictators. Like you take Stalin and Mao. Just read a little bit about their lives. Stalin had this total paranoia where he was thinking that even the people closest to him who were actually loyal to him and doing whatever he told them to do, he was thinking they could be a threat. So sometimes he had them killed for no other reason. And the same thing with Mao, who killed, thousands and thousands of people that he saw as a threat. Even, millions of Chinese that were working against his Cultural Revolution. So you see these extreme examples of people and how far some people can be willing to go to destroy what they see as a threat. And it's because they're totally taken over by the ego and this physical survival game. So, obviously, if you are a spiritual person, you've already overcome this game. But it could be maybe valuable to look at how do people actually overcome this game. Once they are trapped in this complete survival game, how do you overcome it? Well, you actually overcome it in the School of Hard Knocks. This is what I've talked about several times. We can even listen for some higher direction coming from our higher selves or descended masters, or we can be in the School of Hard Knocks. And if we're in the School of Hard Knocks, when you go into this survival game, what happens is, of course, as I said, you become a self-fulfilling prophecy. So you will see that there are people, other people are a threat. And sometimes you manage to kill them before they kill you. But in many cases, they kill you before you kill them. So what these people experience is they're killed. And lifetime after lifetime, they experience they're killed. And the thing is, for a time, this will validate the ego's belief, the ego's illusion that other people are out to get you. It will seem to validate this. But in the long run, what happens? What happens is that you're killed violently. This leaves a scar in your emotional, mental, and identity bodies. So you go out of embodiment. But then you come into your next embodiment and you carry that scar with you. Maybe not a conscious memory of it, but you carry a certain scar with you. And remember what I said at that level, people are identified with their physical bodies. They think they are the physical body. But if you have experienced enough times and enough lifetimes that you are killed, then you come back and you carry the scar with you from previous lifetimes. There comes a point where the conscious you begins to think, maybe I'm not the body. Maybe I'm actually more than the body. And that's when people then can become open to what is the, you might say, antidote to the physical survival game, which is the golden rule. Don't do to others what you don't want them to do to you. So in other words, you don't want to have your physical body killed. Okay, don't kill other people's physical bodies. And this, I'm not saying that all people, all spiritual people descended to that low level and became trapped in this physical survival game. But what happens to people is when they start realizing they are not the physical body and they don't identify with the physical body, that's when they become open to what the golden rule really means. Because you might have been brought up with a, hearing about the golden rule as I did, and without really being given any understanding of it. But the understanding of the golden rule is really that the universe is a mirror. And that means that when somebody does something to you in this lifetime, it's a result of what you sent into the cosmic mirror in a past lifetime, and also in this one, of course, because you carried it over. So in order to break the spiral, the self-fulfilling prophecy, you have to do something different. Instead of always responding in kind, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, you must break the spiral by turning the other cheek. By not doing to others what they do to you. And you may have to do this several times. Jesus said, forgive 70 times 7. So you may have to do it enough times that you break this subconscious self that's projecting out that other people are a threat and it's perfectly justified to kill other people if they threaten your physical body. And when you break that, that's when you go forward to higher levels of consciousness, where you're still a self-fulfilling prophecy, but you are not projecting out that you live in this dangerous world and that you want other people to be your enemies and kill you. You are willing to look at yourself and say, what can I change? Can I change myself? And by changing myself, can I change my outer circumstances? That's really what the golden rule says. The golden rule says, instead of trying to change other people in order to change your life, start by changing yourself so that you are stopping yourself from doing what other people are doing. You're breaking the spiral. That's what the golden rule really says. Okay, so as I said, most spiritual people, and I think only spiritual people are probably open to these talks. So most spiritual people have already broken the physical survival game because we have disidentified ourselves from the physical body. We realize we are not the physical body, we are more than the physical body. And that's why we can do what Jesus actually said, don't love your life unto the death, but we're willing to lose your life for my sake. So in other words, you're not loving the physical life, the physical body, to the point where you're willing to compromise your spiritual growth. You are willing to follow Christ towards higher and higher levels of oneness, even if it means the death of your physical body, which is, what the Christian martyrs demonstrated, in a sense, that they were willing to die for their beliefs rather than holding on to the physical body and compromising their beliefs or denying their beliefs. there's more could be said about that, but I'm just using it as an example. So, so we have probably in past lives as spiritual people, we have demonstrated this, that the physical life is not so important to us that we're willing to compromise our spiritual growth, however we saw it at the time. Okay, so what we now need to do is talk about the fact that the physical survival game is only the lowest level of survival games. Because what I've explained in many of my videos is that there are 4 levels of the universe, there are 4 levels of our minds. There's the purely physical level, then there's the emotional, which is a higher vibration up, higher energies, then there's the mental, and then the identity level. And beyond that, of course, the spiritual realm. So we have these 4 levels of the mind. And the physical survival game is, of course, related to the mind that runs the physical body. That's where you have the lowest aspect of the ego. But the survival game also has an emotional component. And you can actually see that in people who become so angry that they kill other people, or they hurt other people severely, or they hurt themselves. But it's like anger takes over their minds. They are so totally consumed by the anger that they do things that they later regret, or maybe they don't even regret them, but it's like they act out in this anger. And this is again the ego. And the survival game of the ego, basically you can say, even the physical survival game, it's not about the physical body surviving, it's about the ego surviving. And the ego is trying to hide itself from people by getting them to focus on the survival of the physical body and destroying these threats at the physical level. So it's the same thing at the emotional level. The ego is not really angry. You can't really say that the ego as such is angry. But for some people, the ego uses this emotional survival game to cause them to always be so angry that they're always looking out. The problem is out there. These people are bad people. These people are a threat to me. And there are some people who become so angry that they're willing to kill other people physically. But there are also people who are not at that level. They're not willing to kill others. But they are seeking to influence others at the emotional level, controlling their emotions. They are, psychologists have for many years talked about control games, where people are seeking to control others. And what this really is about you trying to create a certain emotional state in your mind by controlling the emotions of other people. So that, for example, they don't make you feel angry or afraid or embarrassed. So you're trying to control their emotions in order to control your own state of mind. And some people will say, well, what else can people do? What's wrong with that? But all I'm saying is this is an ego game. And it's an ego game for a simple reason. If you are a spiritual person who is seeking to grow, how can you grow? What is spiritual growth all about? It's really about controlling your own state of mind, right? So how can you ultimately control your own state of mind? By working with your own mind. You see, what the people are doing when they are trapped in the emotional survival game of the ego is that instead of trying to directly control their own state of mind, they're trying to control their state of mind indirectly by controlling other people's state of mind. So that I have a tendency to become angry when somebody doesn't agree with me. So I'm trying to control people emotionally to get them to always agree with me so I don't become angry. That's an ego game. Anytime you see this, that people are trying to control other people in order to control their own state of mind instead of working directly on their own minds, that's an ego game. Because it's drawing attention away. You are focused on the splinter in the eyes of your brother instead of the beam in your own eye. And that keeps you, when you're focusing on looking out, that keeps you from ever seeing the ego. The ego can feel safe. If you're looking out, you're not going to discover the ego. So the ego can lean back, smoke a cigar, and say, I've got him exactly where I want him. Just let him continue to play this game. So, again, I think most spiritual people have overcome this. Most spiritual people I have met are not aggressive people, and they are not seeking to control other people. But there are, of course, some. I have met a few people on the spiritual path who are still trapped in this ego game. But I think most people have already overcome it, because you come to see this. So now we go to the next level up, the mental level. And the mental level is, of course, where you're thinking, but it's also where you have your ideas. So what you see in many, many people is that they have a certain worldview that's often based on a particular idea or thought system. This can be a religion, it can be a political philosophy, it can be scientific materialism. You see, for example, as I mentioned before, fundamentalist Christians. It is extremely important for them that the Bible is the Word of God and that they are right because they are going to be saved, because they believe in this literal interpretation of the Bible. So they have to, in order to maintain that sense of equilibrium, they have to discredit any ideas that go against theirs. When I was in college many years ago, when I was 18 years old, this was back in the 70s, so there were still convinced Marxists in Denmark back in the 70s. I don't think there are many left today, if any. But back then there were some. And I encountered for the first time in my life these, blood red Marxists. And they felt extremely threatened by my spiritual outlook on life. We were a small group of people who had a spiritual outlook on life, and these Marxists were just so threatened by us. It was amazing to me to see this. It was so important for them, and they tried to do everything they could to ridicule any kind of spiritual belief, because it threatened their Marxist belief that there is nothing, and that religion is the opium of the masses and all this stuff. The same thing you see with some of these scientific materialists today that claim to be neutral scientists, but they go on this crusade to disprove religion, like these militant atheists, as they're called. And why is that? Well, it's an ego game. They feel threatened by the fact that there are some people that don't share their beliefs, and therefore they have to try and disprove and discredit these other people's beliefs. So it's a war of ideas. And again, it's an ego game, because what are these people trying to do? They're trying to change their own state of mind so they can feel at peace, they can be secure in their worldview, that is the ultimate worldview, right? But instead of working on their own minds and seeing, do I have a subconscious self that makes me feel threatened because other people don't have the same beliefs that I do? Do I have this need to establish my idea as the only true idea? Instead of looking at this, they're trying to change other people's minds. So again, they're looking out, trying to change their own state of mind in the indirect way of trying to change other people's state of mind by making them agree with their belief system. Same thing with a Christian fundamentalist, who are also trying to make other people believe in their version of fundamentalist Christianity, and, any number of people. And this is where I have seen many more spiritual people who are still trapped in this game. I was myself when I found the spiritual path when I was 18. And it took me, 20, 25 years to really start overcoming this. And it's almost unavoidable. As spiritual people, we grow up. We can't identify with the religious people. We can't identify with the materialists or the Marxists or whatever we were exposed to. So we feel like we're outsiders. Now we find a spiritual movement, guru, organization, and we say, oh, this is it. This is what I was always looking for. Now I have the ultimate understanding of how life works. And naturally, you don't want that to be threatened. I can look back, in the early 80s, I found Ascended Master Teachings. And for many years, probably till the late 1990s, I was always concerned that maybe there would be something that would disprove the Ascended Master Teachings, or disprove my spiritual outlook on life. What if science came up with some kind of discovery that proved that there is nothing beyond the material world? So I always had that anxiety. And looking back at it, it's clearly an ego game. So I see many other spiritual people who go into the same reaction. You can probably, if you go out there in the world right now, you can probably find 100 spiritual movements, or maybe more. small spiritual movements where they center around a guru, a certain teaching, and they all think, oh, we have the highest truth. And they all feel threatened by those who are different. And that's why spiritual people can't cooperate, and that's why they don't have the impact on society that it could have. I'm not saying I have the solution to this. I don't, because the only solution really is overcoming the ego games. But what I'm saying is that you see many, many spiritual people who are still trapped in this. And you can look at yourself, if you're willing. You can look at yourself and say, do I actually feel threatened if somebody questions my beliefs or my guru or my spiritual practice? Do I feel threatened by this? And then this is an ego game. If you're willing to be honest with yourself, this is an ego game. It can't be anything else. Because what are you doing? You're doing the exact same thing. You're trying to create a sense of peace and equilibrium in your mind through this outer medium of the outer teaching and the outer guru. And therefore, it's a threat to you that all people on the planet don't follow the same guru. And therefore, anybody who disagrees with you, comes up with different ideas, it's a potential threat. You can look at some of my videos, for example, non-duality, where some people it's very important for them to refute what I'm saying. And you just need to ask yourself, why is it so important to them to refute something? If they are sure that what they believe is right, they could just ignore what I'm saying. But they can't ignore what I'm saying. They have to try and refute it and discredit me and make me, silence me, so I don't say what disturbs them. And that's an ego game. It's simply an ego game. And I can see how I was caught in that for many, many years. And, there just comes a point where it was a process for me. It happened not in one glorious epiphany, it happened in several stages, but it came to a point where I started seeing it and just sort of got tired of it. Got tired of always being on the defensive, always being threatened, always feeling that other people should agree with me, or they shouldn't disagree with me, or people should think, as I was caught up in for a long time, that people should see me as a good person. And it was important for me that other people saw me as a good person. And that was obviously trying to reinforce my belief that I'm a good person by getting other people to agree that I was a good person. And, is it necessary? Is it even necessary to see myself as a good person? I am who I am. I express what I express. Does it matter whether I live up to any standard where I'm a good person or this or that? You just come to this point where it isn't important anymore. Okay, so that's the outer beliefs. But now we have the final stage of the survival game of the ego, which is at the identity level. And again, this is where we can see in the world that many people are attached to a specific sense of identity that is defined in this world. It can be their race. I'm a Jew. It can be their religion. I'm a Christian. It can be their political affiliation, their nationality, their family background. Many people are identified with their family. Many people are identified with the place where they were born and grew up. So there are all kinds of things that people use to identify. But they are all related to conditions in this world. And you can see how far people are willing to go. You can see that Jews and Arabs have been locked in the struggle for thousands of years because they identify themselves as Jews and Arabs, and they are so attached to their identity that they can't see beyond it and say, maybe we are just all human beings, or maybe we're even spiritual beings, and maybe all these outer differences don't really matter. You can see dictators. Hitler, he had a certain identity that he was a superior person and he was right. And look how many people he was willing to kill in order to prove that he was right, or in order to destroy any threat to his sense of identity. What is Vladimir Putin doing right now? He has a certain sense of identity for what kind of a person he is, how important of a person he is in Russian history. And it was a result of this identity that made him invade Ukraine. And he can't change it, because he can't let go of that sense of identity. So it doesn't matter to him how many Russian soldiers are killed in the process, let alone Ukrainians. But even his own soldiers, doesn't matter how many are killed, to uphold his sense of identity that he was doing the right thing, and he's an important person who will restore Russia to the greatness it deserves in history. Whatever he thinks, I'm not sure exactly what he thinks, but these are certainly some of the things that people who know him have said about him. So, all I'm saying here is this: even at the identity level, we can be trapped in this identity. And it's not necessarily that we are willing to kill other people, but we can become so identified with outer things. And here's how this relates to spiritual people. As spiritual people, we don't identify ourselves with a physical body. We know we are more than the body. Otherwise, you're really not a spiritual person. But I still see a few spiritual people that are so identified with their emotions that they're still reacting at the emotional level. I also see a larger group of spiritual people who are identified with the mental level, with their outer beliefs and belief system. But there are even some spiritual people that are identified with their sense of identity, so to speak, because even though they see themselves as spiritual people, they see themselves, their identity based on a specific spiritual tradition, or a guru, or an outer teaching, or specific practice. And I understand this. I felt that way for the first several decades I was on a spiritual path, because, as I said, you don't really identify yourself with the religion, with the materialism, with political affiliations, but now you find a spiritual movement. Now you're no longer an outsider, you're certainly an insider in that movement. And the movement has a very specific view of who you are, what kind of a being you are, and you base your identity, you merge your identity with this group identity. And now it becomes very difficult to leave it, because suddenly you're going to lose this sense of belonging somewhere. So I understand it's a difficult thing, but nevertheless, you can still look at what I've said here. What are you trying to do with your spiritual movement? What are you really trying to do? You're trying to create a certain state of mind in yourself, certain inner state. But what's it based on? It's based on something outside yourself. Your guru, your spiritual movement, your spiritual practice, the worldview that your spiritual movement has. These are external things. Again, there's nothing wrong with it. That's all we can do at a certain point. But when you come to the higher levels of the spiritual path, you need to simply make a shift and realize you cannot base your sense of identity on anything in this world or anything outside yourself. Who are you? What kind of a being are you? Are you your physical body? Are you your emotions? Are you the thoughts? Or are you the outer sense of identity that relates to this world? There comes a point where you have to realize, if you want to go further, that you are more than this. And that means you can come to this realization, as I've explained in several videos, that the core of your identity is the conscious you. And the conscious you can be said to be pure awareness or neutral awareness. And with that, I simply mean that it is not the outer personality. It's not the physical body, emotional thoughts, or your sense of identity. It's not that. It's beyond this, because it's an extension of your higher self, your I am presence. So your real identity is your higher self, your I am presence. And it is not in this world. So what is it that's going to give you, in the end, what is going to give you the state of mind that you want? Oneness with your higher self. connection. First connection to a higher self, then oneness with your higher self. And this is what your ego will do absolutely anything it can to prevent. It'll do anything it can from understanding this very thing that I've described to you. It could be said to be the greatest secret on the spiritual path, is that the only thing that's ultimately going to satisfy you is oneness with your higher self. And the ego can never attain that, can never give you that. The ego can only take you away from connection, away from oneness, by causing you to identify with something in this world. So, what this leads to is this realization that the ego is on this impossible quest. The ego is created, as I said, out of dead ideas that are based on separation. But the ego has a survival instinct. It wants to survive. It wants to become immortal. But in trying to become immortal, it is using other dead ideas that spring from separation and duality. And it can never happen. It's an impossible quest. The ego will never know this, because the ego is like, I said, a computer. It can only do what it can see based on duality and separation. But you, the conscious you can become aware that this is an impossible quest. And therefore you can realize that what the ego is trying to do is to ensure its own survival by pulling you, the conscious you, into being engaged in, absorbed in, overshadowed by all of these ego games that are relating to the world. And you can come to the point where you begin to see these games and decide, enough, I don't want to deal with it anymore. I don't want to be sucked into this. I want to be free. And you can realize then the ultimate way to counteract the ego's survival games is to realize that the conscious you doesn't have to do anything to secure its survival, because it's an extension of the I Am Presence, which is in the spiritual realm. It can't die. You don't need to do anything in this world to ensure the survival of the conscious you. You just need to free yourself from the ego's attempts to create immortality in the mortal world. You can never attain oneness through the ego, because the ego is born out of separation. You can attain oneness only by refusing to let your attention be pulled into these ego games that are all based on separation. And that's really the power of coming to understand the survival games of the ego. You don't have to do anything to survive. You just have to stop doing all the things that the ego is projecting at you that you have to do in order to secure the survival of the ego, which, by the way, won't secure the survival of the ego anyway, because the ego is inherently mortal. It can never become immortal. And there are some people that will deny this because they are on a quest to make their egos immortal. And you can go on this quest for a very long time, because the law of free will has very wide boundaries for how long a being is allowed to experiment with separation. But in the end, the law is the law, reality is reality, fact is fact. The ego can never become immortal. You are immortal. You can only think you are immortal when you are identified with the ego. When you stop identifying with the ego, you will one day awaken and realize, oh, I am already immortal. I don't need to do anything. I just need to be who I am. So I hope this has been helpful to you. It certainly was revolutionary for me to come to understand these ideas.